Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The overthrown Mauritanian president, Maawiya Adel Sidi Ahmed Al Taya, arrived in Niger upon his return from Saudi Arabia. This took place hours after the military takeover of state television and radio stations and the closing of Nouakchott International Airport to air traffic.
دون سابق مؤشرات واضحة لف الغموض الوضع في العاصمة الموريتانية.
Without any clear warning signs, ambiguity overshadowed the Mauritanian capital during the morning hours, and the pictures broadcasted by state television stations remained focused on the pages of the Holy Quran. In addition, there was an increase in presidential guards at the outskirts of one of the most important civic centers in the capital of Nouakchott, extending their control over the radio and television broadcasting building and over main military bases. A knowledgeable local source confirmed the success of the military coup against the regime of Mauritanian President Maawiya Ould Sid Ahmed Daya while he was in Riyadh attending the funeral of Saudi Arabia's King Fahad bin Abdul Aziz. His plane was forbidden from landing in Mauritania and thus redirected its route and landed in Nigeria's capital, Niamey. Another journalist who was following the situation previously reported gunfire from a heavy tank near the Presidential Republic building, in addition to quick arrests among senior members of the army. In the past, Mauritania witnessed numerous unsuccessful coup attempts, the latest being June 2003 when the military took over Nouakchott for 2 days, as well as the failed military coup that took place last August.
سيطر العسكريون على نواكشوط لمدة يومين كما شهدت انقلابا عسكريا فاشلا آخر في أغسطس من العام الماضي.
أوقفت الشرطة المصرية اليوم الكثير من المعارضين بينهم مسؤولون في حركة كفاية.
The Egyptian police detained a large number of demonstrators protesting President Mubarak's decision to run for the re-election for the 5th term. The arrests include some members of the Kifaya movement. According to the Kifaya movement, 50 members have been detained, including the movement spokesman George Ishaq and 2 senior leaders, Amin Iskander and Wa'il Khalil. Since 1982, Egypt has been enforcing what is called the emergency law, which prevents people from demonstrating in public places. However, the question remains on how effective these kind of protests are in determining the outcome of the upcoming presidential elections. Tensions are running high. As the Egyptian police clashed with demonstrators, the people reacted angrily at the excessive force used by the police, who used batons to subdue the protesters. The demonstrators took to the streets in large numbers to voice their anger over the decision of Hosni Mubarak to run for the presidency for a 5th term. After the visits of United States Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to Egypt and the American pressure on Egypt to implement reforms, protesters were allowed to demonstrate in the streets without any police intervention. It remains to be seen if such police brutality and the way they handled the protest is going to derail the truce between the opposition and the Egyptian government. The protesters have been in full force since the decision by the Egyptian president to run for re-election. Such a decision points out that the presidential campaign will be very intense and very heated because the opposition parties will try to sabotage Mubarak's victory. The police have rounded up a large number of demonstrators. However, some of the detainees have been released.
We are against renewing the people's confidence in the current administration of Hosni Mubarak. The alleged upcoming election process is not legitimate. The National Party has a history of manipulating and tampering with election results, which undermines the credibility of the people.
The protest and the police actions that follow show that nobody is supposed to oppose the current administrations of Hosni Mubarak. This is proof of the democracy that Egypt is enjoying. It is not acceptable for even one person to say no to Mubarak.
The opposition's message is clear that they intend to intensify their efforts to continue their fight against the policy of the current administration and to voice their objection to Mubarak's decision in running for the re-election. Sharm el-Sheikh's terror attacks and the fear of the Egyptian government of the rise of security threats justify the police action of using excessive force in subduing the demonstrators. It is the struggle of the people who took to the streets in vast numbers to voice their concern over the decision of the Egyptian president to run for re-election. The police moved in quickly, swinging their batons to show the demonstrators that they will not tolerate any future protests in the streets. The opposition is protesting the current administration policies, such as the enactment of the state of emergency laws and the strengthening of the laws that crack down on human freedoms. Such political situation hints that the campaign of the upcoming presidential election will be tense.
The crackdown on the protesters shows the arrogance of the current government in refusing to accept any democratic election that may change the face of the current administration.
Some analysts expect a heated campaign, and others say that what is taking place now is part of what will happen during the upcoming period. Hani Amara for Al-Madar program, Abu Dhabi Television, Cairo.
In light of the death of his predecessor, John Garang, the new leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, Salva Kiir, called on all Sudanese to refrain from violence. However, riots continued to sweep through the Sudanese capital of Khartoum. Salva Kiir took office after the death of John Garang, who was killed in a helicopter crash while en route from Uganda to Sudan.
In Khartoum, new waves of clashes and confrontations erupted in the streets for the second consecutive day. The violence was triggered by Garang's death, as loyalists and supporters to the Sudan People's Liberation Movement took into the streets. The new skirmishes that the police tried to contain resulted in yet more casualties, which raised the number of the dead, although the exact number is not confirmed yet, to 46 victims. According to other reports, the latest wave of violence is taking a new shape, as local Arabs retaliated against the supporters of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, who vandalized a number of public and private properties.
What happened is that people did not know what hit them. When the news of Garang's death reached the people, they emerged to the streets, and this was tragic.
The police squad cars were deployed fully to protect government buildings and strategic institutions. Clashes broke out between the Arabs and the Southerners in the alley of Haj Yusuf, east of Khartoum, where Garang lived for many years. Salva Kiir, the new leader of Sudan People's Liberation Movement, called on the angry Southerners to maintain calm and not to lose hope over the death of their historic leader.
My message for all Sudanese is to maintain calm and to keep the peace, because we can go forward as we all live in a non-violent society.
The Southern leader also revoiced his support to the peace process and confirmed his full compliance with the accord that was signed in Khartoum. However, all calls for restoring security and stability in Khartoum did not prevent the angry youth from taking to the streets, because they believe Garang's death was not an accident, but rather an assassination.
Iran accused the European Union of trying to block Tehran from enriching uranium permanently. In a letter addressed to the Nuclear Power Agency, Iran criticized London, Paris, and Berlin of giving in to the American pressures while confirming its willingness to continue its talks with these European countries.
Tehran did not accept the European plan because it did not meet its minimum demands. It also made the decision of continuing its peaceful nuclear activities in Isfahan, ignoring American and European threats. The US and Europe have requested to transfer Iran's nuclear files to the Security Council. This courageous decision was taken after the expiration of the August 1st deadline, which was set at the London's convention, where the European countries demanded of Iran to give up its nuclear program.
We will start our work because the deadline deadline had passed, and the Europeans were very slow in their response. Our people can no longer wait. We will commence our work in the uranium enrichment program in Isfahan. However, we will halt our uranium enrichment program in Natanz.
Iranian nuclear negotiator Ali Agha Mohammadi confirmed that Tehran will be firm in its response towards what he terms Europe's political aggression.
Regardless to all the excuses used by the Europeans, such as the change in the government, we confirmed that if the negotiation does not produce any fruitful results and Europe intends to continue its policy of aggression towards Iran, we will strongly respond to such threats.
In light of the London Convention, which ignored Iran's right of establishing a uranium enrichment program to generate electric power, Tehran resumed working on its nuclear activities program in Isfahan. Iran has not officially received the European package and the new deadline for compliance.
It seemed that the Europeans used the policy of buying more time, and this is not acceptable. The Iranian parliament had voted on the continuation of the nuclear program. The new government and the parliament are expected to discuss the case and come to a firm decision.
This swift decision came just a few days before the end of President Khatami's term. The European countries did not think much about it then. However, Tehran confirmed that it will continue to halt its uranium enrichment program in the facility of Natanz in case Iran's files would be transferred to the Security Council, as Europe is threatening to do.
By making this decision at the end of his term, the government of Khatami wanted to hit two birds with one stone. The first is to alleviate some of the criticism locally regarding its nuclear policy, and the second, to take the burden of such decision off the upcoming government. Needless to say, the decision carried with it an important message to the Europeans that the Iranian nuclear policy has not and will not change as new government officials are sworn in.
The new leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, Salva Kiir Mayardit, described yesterday's violence and riots in the streets as tragic. He called on the people to be patient and tolerant for the sake of maintaining peace in the country. The leadership of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in Eurosite condemned the violence and the riots that killed a number of innocent people. The mood was not pleasant here at Eurosite, as people looked very gloomy as the news of violence spread through the crowd, which Mr. Mayardit described as tragic and unfortunate, calling on the Sudanese people to be patient and to refrain from getting involved, slipping into these violent acts.
وطالب جماهير الشعب السوداني بالتحلي بالصبر وعدم الانزلاق في مثل هذه الأعمال.
Despite the bad and painful news of the death of John Garang, there is no need for all this violence. We heard there were some reports of violence in Khartoum and other cities. We call on all the Sudanese people to stay united and live in harmony and continue on the path of non-violence and reconciliation. We need to continue to work together to fulfill Dr. Garang's legacy and to implement the comprehensive peace agreement.
Salva Kiir confirmed that the movement tried to stop and contain the violence in the areas that are under its control and pointed out the importance of following on the peaceful example of Garang. In a TV interview we conducted with Garang's widow, Rebecca, she appeared to the Sudanese people to stand united behind the peace accord, confirming that the movement will pass these crises as its leadership refrained from incitements and moved quickly to reaffirm their commitment to the peace accord.
The Sudanese people are not hurt more than me for Garang's death, so I urge the Sudanese people to maintain calm in the streets of Sudan. People should not mourn the death of Garang by committing violence in the streets of Sudan. People should keep peace in the streets of Sudan. We should protect the peace and the peace agreement. All the Sudanese people in North and South should live in peace.
Head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's political department, Farouk Kaddoumi, held talks with MP Saad Hariri on developments in the occupied Palestinian territories and the recent security measures that were taken in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. Kaddoumi hailed the head of the future bloc in parliament, saying like his assassinated father, the late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, MP Saad viewed the Palestinian cause as part of his national obligation. After the meeting, which was also attended by MP Bahia Hariri and a Palestinian delegation, Kaddoumi described the situation in the region as very delicate and told reporters he updated Hariri on planned withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip, calling it a partial achievement. Discussions also focused on bilateral Palestinian-Lebanese ties, which the Palestinian official described as strong. He stressed that Hariri wanted to resolve the problems which were raised by certain parties, citing the recent security measures that were taken at the entrance of refugee camps. He told reporters MP Bahia Hariri also explained at the meeting the contacts that are underway to resolve the issue. Syria said it deported hundreds of Lebanese experts working in the domains of mobile phone communication, advertising, banking, fashion, and hotel management. A source from Syria's Interior Ministry said those Lebanese did not have regular working permits. Tensions between Lebanon and Syria have been high following the withdrawal of Syrian troops and a border blockade, which has paralyzed Lebanese land exports to the region. Washington reiterated calls on Lebanon's government to disarm Hezbollah while denouncing Syria's interference in Lebanese domestic affairs. But the U.S. Agency for International Development said the Bush administration asked Congress to approve $35 million in U.S. aid and $1.7 million in other support. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs David Welsh told Congress yesterday the Lebanese army should be deployed to the whole country and particularly to the south. Welsh said Washington expects Lebanon to meet its international obligations, which include a move to disarm Hezbollah and other armed groups, including armed Palestinian factions. In testimony to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Welsh said, quote, "Until that happens, Hezbollah represents a continuing threat to U.S. citizens." The U.S. government classifies Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Citing U.S. sources, Welsh said that Iranian training personnel were helping Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. The U.S. official reiterated that his country would have no contact with Lebanon's Energy and Water Minister, Mohammad Fnish, who is a member of Hezbollah. But on Wednesday, the leader of Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, said no one could uproot the Shiite Muslim group. He told reporters in Beirut's southern suburbs, the resistance in Lebanon is not an armed gang that can be hit or eradicated. Responding to Prime Minister Fouad Signora's pledge to protect Hezbollah, U.S. official Tom Lantos called the statement profoundly disturbing. He said he was not aware of any Israeli threats to Lebanon. Welsh agreed, challenging Signora, whose government has the Bush administration's support. Welsh said there is no part of Lebanon occupied by Israel. Welsh added he did not know what they would be resisting. The official said Hezbollah admits its material support for Palestinian, quote, terrorist operations, which undermines the Palestinian leadership's goal of stopping violence in Israel and the Palestinian territories. He also criticized Syria for interfering in Lebanon's political affairs, citing a campaign of intimidation and violence. Welsh testified there was a continuing covert Syrian presence there, despite the withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon. Still, Welsh and James Condor, an assistant administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, said the Bush administration had asked Congress to approve $35 million in U.S. aid and $1.7 million in other support. He said plans would be made for an international donors conference in Beirut this fall. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon lashed out at Syria, alleging it helped Palestinian armed factions and said its intelligence services were still in Lebanon. In an interview yesterday with France 3 television channel during a 3-day visit to France, he said Syria continues to be the headquarters of the most dangerous Islamist organizations, Hamas and Jihad. Adding the order come from there, Sharon claimed that their training takes place on Syrian territory and at the same time, Syrians have not given up their will to control Lebanon. He said there are still Syrian secret agents as well as soldiers from the Iranian Revolution in Lebanon. Sharon also expressed concerns at the growing political role of Hezbollah in Lebanon. He said it must be disarmed, claiming it is not possible that a democratic Lebanese regime has within it an armed organization which acts as the envoy of Syria and Iran.
U.S. Marines and one interpreter were killed in western Iraq when their armored vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb. The United States military said one other Marine was wounded in the attack, which occurred during combat operations near Haditha, 260 kilometers northwest of Baghdad. On the other hand, the United States Embassy said an American freelance journalist, Stephen Vincent, was found dead today in the southern Iraqi city of Basra. Vincent, who had been in Basra for the last 2 months, was abducted along with his female Iraqi translator, who was also shot twice but survived. In another attack, 4 people were killed, including 3 policemen across Iraq. 2 policemen were killed when their patrol was attacked by gunmen in the town of Ba'quba, 60 kilometers northwest of Baghdad. Another policeman was shot dead by gunmen in Baghdad. In a separate incident, 1 man was killed when a mortar round hit the center of Baghdad near the city governor's office. 2 other mortar rounds also hit Baghdad. Iran's President-elect Mahmoud Ahmadinejad completed a first step towards taking office, receiving approval from Iran's Supreme Leader. Ahmadinejad was officially inaugurated today when the Islamic Republic's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, approved his appointment in the Imam Khomeini Hussein Religious Complex in downtown Tehran. Among the audience was President Mohammad Khatami and the former President Hashmi Rafsanjani. Supreme Leader Khamenei, in his speech, suggested Iran would continue with its nuclear program despite intense pressure from the West. Ahmadinejad, the former mayor of Tehran, who won the June elections amid allegations of unfair practices, pledged to work for social justice and the alleviation of poverty in his term, which will officially begin after his swearing in on Saturday. Saudis pledged allegiance to King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz today in a ceremony seen as a public endorsement of the new monarch of the Saudi Arabia. Prominent figures conveyed on a royal palace in Riyadh to swear allegiance to King Abdullah and new Crown Prince Sultan bin Abdul Aziz. Clerics, religious scholars, tribal chiefs, officials and businessmen, as well as ordinary citizens, take part in the process. Saudi Arabia's Grand Mufti Sheikh Abdul Aziz Al Sheikh has called on citizens to rally behind King Abdullah and his Crown Prince, marking the endorsement of the official religious establishment. The United Nations Security Council urged the people of Sudan to honor John Garang's memory by restoring calm and pursuing peace. Capital Khartoum coped with another day of riots sparked by his death. A statement adopted unanimously by the 15-nation council said that the Security Council trusts that, despite the sudden death of Dr. Garang, the people of Sudan remain united and continue to work for the consolidation of the peace in the country by implementing the comprehensive peace agreement for which Dr. Garang worked uninstinctively. The statement also said the council remained determined to help the Sudanese people and the fighting throughout the country and promote national reconciliation. The council added this is a time for the world community to come together to support Dr. Garang's vision of a united and peaceful Sudan.
Good evening and welcome to IBA News from Jerusalem. In our top story, thousands of right-wing protesters are currently gathered in Ofakim for a mass rally against the planned pullout from Gaza. Yesh Ahed said they will lead a march to Gaza settlements following the rally, despite police promises to stop them from infiltrating into the area. IBA's military correspondent Dennis Zinn brings us this report.
Some 20,000 anti-withdrawal demonstrators woke up in the western Negev town of Ofakim this morning alongside thousands of policemen and soldiers. Following the rally last night in Sderot, the protesters moved on to Ofakim, 30 kilometers away and safely out of range of Palestinian Qassam rockets. After morning prayers, the protest organizers convened to discuss the day's actions. They said they were satisfied by last night's event in Sderot, which was attended, they claim, by 50,000 demonstrators. Official estimates are half of that. The organizers said despite the police ban, they're going to march towards the Kisafim junction tonight. They said they have no other means of expressing their opposition to the disengagement plan.
I came from Jerusalem, and I'm here with, as you can see, tens and tens of thousands of other people that have come to Ofakim and Netivot and Sderot to protest that this government is doing a terrible, terrible thing. They're giving a prize to terrorists.
I feel swindled, I feel deceived, because I voted for Ariel Sharon. I gave him my vote, my whole family's vote, and he in fact did exactly the opposite of what he was meant to do. That is why I feel that my democratic power is to be here and to demonstrate against him.
The security forces in the area were today bolstered by 6,500 soldiers. Police officers in the southern district said they will forcefully keep all protesters away from the Gaza Strip, and there'll be mass arrests if necessary. This is the second day of the planned 5-day protest, which is scheduled to end on Friday. Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
5 people were arrested overnight as they tried to break through a police roadblock en route to Kisufim. Among them was West Bank settler leader Daniela Weiss, who was taken to prison but later released. The 4 other activists were also released under special conditions that restrict their movements until charges are filed. About 30 other protesters scuffled with police in Kibbutz Nir in the western Negev desert. Vice Premier Shimon Peres and Housing Minister Yitzhak Herzog today toured the new trailer villa park in Nitzan, designed to house Gaza settlers. The visit turned uncomfortable when a power struggle broke out over who should receive credit for the villa buildings, the Defense Ministry or the Housing Ministry. The government plans for residents to live in the trailer villas for 2 years. About 70 Jewish families from Gaza have already received keys to 2.5-room trailer villas. Many settler families, however, complain the villas are too small for their family needs.
The alternative here is the best that the country can offer to the settlers. It's a beautiful location. What you are seeing now is temporary buildings and apartments. Eventually it will be not far from here, among the most beautiful houses and villas that the country can offer to its.
The Islamic Jihad said today that it has ordered its operatives to stop firing rockets at Israeli targets in the lead-up to the pullout from the Gaza Strip. This after terrorists fired 3 Qassams at Sderot. Last night, a Palestinian boy was killed by a Qassam rocket that missed its Israeli target and hit a family home in the village of Beit Hanun in northern Gaza. Palestinian Minister Mohammed Dahlan charged those who launched the rockets as taking the place of Israeli occupiers and hurting innocent Palestinian civilians. In related news, Abu Qassam, an Islamic Jihad leader in the West Bank, told the Haaretz newspaper that his organization might recognize the state of Israel. Abu Qassam said, quote, "Just as Zionist ideology is beginning to give up parts of the land of Israel, so his organization would be willing to give up parts of its ideology, calling for an Islamic state from the river to the sea."
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.
Hi, I'm Blanche Shaheen. Please show you value Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, and Link TV, your source for the best international independent programming. Call us or log on today to ensure that the global dialogue continues. Thank you for your support.